At my son's wedding ceremony, my daughter-in-law told me, "Sit near the trash, that's where you belong," after using me like an ATM for years. I just smiled and walked away. When the pastor asked if anyone objected to the wedding, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I should have known better than to expect anything different. After 27 years of raising Marcus and 30 years of being walked over by everyone in this family, I suppose I should have been prepared for what happened at his wedding. But even I, Joyce Mitchell, 65 years old and supposedly wise enough to know better, wasn't ready for the humiliation that Zoe had planned for me that day. The morning started early. I'd been up since 5 a.m., making sure every detail was perfect for my son's special day. The flowers I'd paid for looked beautiful in the church. The reception hall I'd booked and funded was decorated exactly as Zoe had demanded. The 3-tier cake I'd ordered was a masterpiece. $28,000. That's what this wedding cost me. My entire retirement savings drained to give Marcus and his bride the fairy tale wedding she dreamed of. I stood in the back of St. Mary's Cathedral, smoothing down my navy blue dress. It wasn't expensive, not like the designer gown Zoe was wearing in the bridal suite upstairs. But it was clean and pressed and appropriate for the mother of the groom. At least I thought it was. "Joyce." Zoe's voice cut through the morning quiet like a blade. She appeared at the top of the stairs in her wedding dress, looking every bit the princess she'd always believed herself to be. "We need to talk." I climbed the stairs slowly, my arthritic knees protesting with each step. "What is it, dear? Is everything all right?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she led me into the small room where the bridesmaids were finishing their makeup. Her sister Brittany was there, along with 2 college friends whose names I'd never bothered to learn. They all stopped what they were doing to stare at me. "Show her," Zoe said to Brittany, who pulled out her phone and showed me a seating chart. "Your seat is right here," Brittany said with a smirk, pointing to a spot at the very back of the church, near the doors where people would be walking in and out all through the ceremony. I frowned. But I thought the mother of the groom traditionally sits in the front row. Zoe laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Traditional mothers-in-law don't embarrass their families, Joyce. Look at yourself. Look at this dress. Look at your hair." I touched my hair self-consciously. I'd spent 2 hours at the salon yesterday, getting it done specifically for today. It wasn't perfect, but it looked nice. Clean. Respectable. "I don't understand," I said quietly. "Of course you don't." Zoe turned to face me fully, and I saw something cold in her green eyes that I'd never noticed before. "You think just because you paid for this wedding, you deserve to be treated like family. But money doesn't buy class, Joyce. Money doesn't change what you are." One of her bridesmaids giggled, and I felt my cheeks burning with shame. "What am I?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Zoe stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. "You're the woman who raised my husband in a trailer park. You're the woman who works as a cashier at Walmart. You're the woman who doesn't belong in a place like this with people like us." The room went silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I'd known Zoe for 3 years, since she and Marcus started dating. She'd always been polite to me, sweet even, especially when she needed something. A down payment for their apartment, money for her engagement ring, funds for this very wedding. "I see," I managed to say. "Do you?" Zoe's voice was sharp now, no longer pretending to be kind. "Because I don't think you do. I think you believe that because you opened your wallet for us, you've earned yourself a place in our lives. But you haven't, Joyce. You're not our equal. You're not my equal. And I won't have you sitting in the front row, embarrassing my family and friends." She paused, tilting her head as if considering something. "Actually, you know what? I've changed my mind about your seat entirely." She grabbed the phone from Brittany and showed me a new seating chart. My name had been moved to a folding chair near the coat room, completely separate from the other guests. "Sit near the trash," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's where you belong." The bridesmaids laughed. Actually laughed, as if my humiliation was the funniest thing they'd ever witnessed. I stood there for a moment, looking at these young women who thought my pain was entertainment. Then I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a broken smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just made a decision that would change everything. Of course, dear, I said calmly. Whatever makes you happy. I turned and walked out of the room, my hand instinctively reaching for the envelope in my purse. The envelope I'd been carrying for weeks, unsure if I'd ever have the courage to use it. Zoe had just given me that courage. As I walked back down the stairs, I could hear them laughing behind me. Laughing at the stupid old woman who just spent her life savings on a wedding where she wasn't even welcome as an honored guest. But I wasn't thinking about their laughter anymore. I was thinking about the piece of paper in that envelope. The piece of paper that would wipe those smiles off their faces forever. The ceremony was starting soon. In just a few hours, the pastor would ask if anyone objected to this marriage. And for the first time in 30 years, I was going to speak up. I didn't always know. For 27 years, I believed Marcus was my flesh and blood. I changed his diapers, walked the floors with him during colicky nights, taught him to ride a bicycle, and watched him graduate high school with the pride only a mother could feel. Even when people commented that he didn't look like me, I brushed it off. Genetics could be funny, I told myself. He must have gotten his father's features. But 3 months ago, everything changed. I was cleaning out Marcus and Zoe's apartment while they were on vacation in Europe. Another trip I'd funded, of course. They'd asked me to water their plants and collect their mail, and being the helpful mother I'd always been, I'd agreed to give the place a thorough cleaning too. That's when I found the shoebox. It was tucked away in the back of their bedroom closet, behind winter coats that still had tags on them. I only discovered it because I was trying to organize their overstuffed closet as a surprise. The box was old, made of cardboard that had seen better days, and it was labeled in handwriting I didn't recognize. Personal Marcus Robert. My son's initials. I should have left it alone. I should have respected his privacy. But something about that box called to me. Maybe it was mother's intuition. Maybe it was just nosiness. Either way, I found myself sitting on their bedroom floor, lifting the lid with trembling fingers. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, written in the same unfamiliar handwriting as the label. They were addressed to Marcus, but not at any address I recognized. The return address made my blood run cold. Sarah Hendricks, the name of my ex-husband Robert's secretary from 30 years ago. With shaking hands, I opened the first letter. It was dated from when Marcus was 18 years old. My dearest son, it began. I know this must come as a shock to you, but I can't keep this secret any longer. Your father made me promise never to tell you the truth, but now that you're an adult, you deserve to know who you really are. I had to set the letter down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. When I picked it up again, the words seemed to blur together, but I forced myself to keep reading. Robert and I had an affair that lasted 2 years. You were conceived during that time. When I told him I was pregnant, he panicked. He was already married to Joyce, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing his comfortable life. He convinced me to give you to him and Joyce to raise, telling her you were adopted through a private agency. Joyce never knew the truth. She believed she was saving an unwanted baby. She never knew she was raising her husband's illegitimate child. The letter went on, but I couldn't process the words anymore. I sat there on the floor of my son's bedroom, surrounded by evidence of the biggest lie of my life, and I felt like I was drowning. Robert had died 8 years ago from a heart attack. I'd mourned him despite our divorce. I'd even helped pay for his funeral because Marcus wanted him buried properly. And all this time he'd been keeping this secret. This enormous, life-altering secret. I forced myself to read more letters. Sarah had died when Marcus was 21, but before her death, she'd written him dozens of letters explaining their family history. She told him about his half-siblings, children she'd had with her husband who never knew about Marcus. She told him about medical history that I'd never known to share with doctors. She told him about a trust fund she'd set up for him, money that he'd never mentioned to me. But the worst part, the part that made me sick to my stomach, was the letter from Marcus himself. It was a draft written in his own handwriting and dated just 2 years ago. It was addressed to no one in particular, more like a journal entry than a letter. I've known the truth about my parentage since I was 18, it read. Sarah told me everything before she died. I'm not Joyce's biological son, and she has no idea. Robert made her believe I was adopted from strangers. The irony is almost funny. Joyce thinks she's being this noble woman, sacrificing everything for her adopted son, when really she's just been played by her cheating husband. My vision blurred with tears as I read the next part. Sometimes I feel guilty about taking her money. She works so hard at that job she hates and she gives me everything she has. But then I remember that she chose this life when she agreed to adopt me. She chose to be responsible for someone else's child. Robert may have lied to her, but she still made the choice to raise me. So really she owes me this support. I'm not going to feel guilty about letting her play the martyr. I dropped the letter like it was on fire. My son, the boy I'd loved and sacrificed for my entire adult life, knew he wasn't my biological child and had been knowingly exploiting my love for years. I thought about all the times he'd called asking for money. Rent payments, car repairs, credit card debt, school loans. I thought about how he'd look at me with those puppy dog eyes and say, "Mom, you're the only person I can count on. You know I'd do anything for you." And I'd believed him. God help me, I believed every word. The worst part was Zoe. I found text messages printed out between Marcus and her, discussing how to get more money out of me. They called me the ATM, and joked about how easy it was to manipulate poor old Joyce. "Just tell her you need it for something important," Zoe had texted. "She'll never say no. She's too desperate to be needed." They were right. I was desperate to be needed. After Robert left me, after 20 years of marriage where I'd never been good enough for him, I'd thrown myself into being the best mother I could be. I'd worked double shifts to pay for Marcus's college. I'd taken out loans to help him start his career. I'd emptied my retirement account to pay for this wedding. And it had all been built on a lie. I sat in that bedroom for 2 hours, reading every letter, every note, every piece of evidence of the deception that had shaped my entire adult life. When I finally stood up, my legs were stiff and my eyes were swollen from crying. But I wasn't broken. I was angry. I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I finished cleaning their apartment, watered their plants, collected their mail. I acted like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. That night I went home and made a phone call to a lawyer. Then I made an appointment with a DNA testing lab. I needed official proof of what I already knew in my heart. The results came back 2 weeks later, just as Marcus and Zoe were finalizing their wedding plans. According to the test, there was zero probability that Marcus was my biological son. I stared at that paper for a long time, thinking about 27 years of love, sacrifice, and manipulation. 27 years of believing I was doing right by my child, only to discover that my child had been laughing at me behind my back. The envelope containing those test results had been in my purse ever since, waiting for the right moment. As I sat in that folding chair near the coat room, watching Zoe glide down the aisle in the dress I'd paid for, I knew that moment had finally come. The 2 weeks between getting the DNA results and the wedding were the longest of my life. I went through the motions of being the excited mother of the groom, smiling when Marcus called to tell me about honeymoon plans I was funding, nodding when Zoe demanded last-minute changes to the reception that would cost me another $1,500. But inside I was planning. I started with Robert's belongings, boxes I'd stored in my garage since his death 8 years ago. I'd always meant to go through them properly, but grief and then life had gotten in the way. Now I had a different motivation. It took me 3 days to find what I was looking for. Hidden behind old tax returns and insurance papers, I discovered a manila folder labeled Personal Documents. Inside was Robert's real will, not the one that had been probated. This one was dated 2 years before his death and contained a confession. To whoever finds this, it read in Robert's familiar handwriting, "I need to tell the truth about Marcus Mitchell. He is not Joyce's adopted son as she believes. He is my biological son with Sarah Hendricks, my former secretary. I convinced Joyce to take him when he was born, telling her he was from an adoption agency. I forged the papers. I lied to everyone. Joyce has spent 25 years raising my illegitimate child, believing she was doing a noble thing by adopting a stranger's baby. She deserves to know the truth, but I am too much of a coward to tell her." My hands were shaking as I photographed every page. Robert had included copies of Marcus's real birth certificate, showing Sarah as his mother and Robert as his father. He'd kept hospital records from the day Marcus was born, proving that Sarah had given birth to him in a private clinic, not through any adoption agency. But that wasn't all I found. Hidden in another box was a bank statement from an account I'd never known existed. Robert had been receiving payments from Sarah's family for years. Apparently, she'd come from money, and they'd been paying him to keep quiet about Marcus's existence. Even after Sarah's death, her family had continued making monthly payments to Robert, and after his death, those payments had been going directly to Marcus. $1,500 a month for 8 years. Money that Marcus had been collecting while asking me to pay his rent, his car payment, his credit cards. Money that came from his real family while he bled me dry, playing the role of my grateful adopted son. I photocopied everything and put it all back exactly where I'd found it. Then I called my lawyer again. I need you to look into something else, I told him. I need to know if there are any living relatives of Sarah Hendricks, and I need to know if they're aware they have a nephew. The answer came back within a week. Sarah had 2 sisters, both still alive. Neither of them knew about Marcus. According to my lawyer's investigation, Sarah's family had been told she died childless. The monthly payments hadn't been coming from her family at all. They'd been coming from a trust fund that Robert had set up using Sarah's life insurance money. Money that should have gone to her sisters after her death. Robert had essentially stolen from Sarah's family to pay Marcus, and Marcus had known about it the entire time. The more I discovered, the sicker I felt. Not just about the lies, but about how thoroughly I'd been played. Every time Marcus had called me Mom, with that special warmth in his voice. Every time he'd told me I was the only parent who mattered to him. Every time he'd made me feel needed and loved, he'd been acting. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I did something I'd never done before in my relationship with Marcus. I started saying no. When he called asking for money to pay for wedding suits for his groomsmen, I told him I couldn't afford it. When Zoe demanded I pay for a professional photographer for their engagement party, I said I'd already spent my budget. When Marcus asked me to cover their honeymoon expenses, I told him they'd have to figure it out themselves. The change in their attitude was immediate and ugly. "What's wrong with you lately?" Marcus demanded during one of our weekly dinners. "You're acting weird, Mom." "Selfish." "I'm just trying to be more careful with my money," I said calmly. "Since when?" Zoe snorted. "You've never cared about money before. You've always been happy to help us out." I looked at her across the table at the restaurant I was paying for, eating the expensive meal I was buying, wearing the bracelet I'd given her for her birthday, and I felt nothing but disgust. "Maybe I'm finally learning that money doesn't grow on trees," I said. Marcus leaned forward, and for a moment, I saw something calculating in his eyes. Something I'd never noticed before, or maybe something I'd been too blind to see. "Mom, are you having financial problems? Because if you are, you should have told us. Zoe and I could help figure something out." The lie came so easily to him. The fake concern, the offer to help that we all knew was meaningless. This was the son I'd raised, the boy I'd loved unconditionally for 27 years. And he was sitting there manipulating me with the skill of a professional con artist. "I'm fine," I said. "I just think it's time you two started handling your own expenses." The look that passed between them was quick, but I caught it. It was the look of 2 people realizing their cash cow was drying up. "Well," Zoe said with a tight smile, "I guess we'll just have to make some adjustments to the wedding plans." "I guess you will," I agreed. That was when they started being mean to me. Not openly, not in a way that anyone else would notice, but in small cutting ways that let me know they were punishing me for my newfound backbone. Zoe stopped inviting me to wedding planning appointments. Marcus stopped calling as often, and when he did call, his conversations were short and cold. They made jokes at my expense during family gatherings, subtle digs about my job, my appearance, my small house. They thought they were training me like a dog that needed to be reminded of its place. They thought that if they withdrew their affection, I'd come crawling back with my wallet open, desperate to regain their approval. But I wasn't the same woman anymore. Every cruel comment, every dismissive look, every attempt to make me feel small just confirmed what I already knew. They didn't love me. They probably never had. The night before the wedding, Marcus came to my house. I was expecting him to make one last plea for money, maybe to apologize for their recent coldness and ask me to help with some final expense. Instead, he stood in my living room and looked around with obvious distaste. "You know, Mom," he said, "Zoe's been thinking that maybe it's time you considered selling this place. It's getting pretty run down, And you're not getting any younger. I followed his gaze around my modest but clean home. The house I'd bought with my savings after Robert left me. The house where I'd raised Marcus, where I'd bandaged his scraped knees and helped him with homework and celebrated his achievements. Why would I sell my house? I asked. Well, you could move into a nice assisted living place. Something with other people your age. And the money from selling could help secure your future. Maybe help your family too. There it was. The final play. They didn't just want my current money, they wanted my house too. They wanted everything. I smiled at my son, this young man who shared none of my DNA but all of Robert's worst qualities. I'll think about it, I lied. He hugged me goodbye and I let him. I even hugged him back, thinking about how this would probably be the last time he'd touch me with anything resembling affection. After he left, I sat in my quiet house and thought about 27 years of motherhood. About all the sacrifices I'd made, all the love I'd given, all the hopes I'd invested in this boy who'd been laughing at me behind my back for nearly a decade. Tomorrow was his wedding day. Tomorrow I would give him a gift he'd never forget. The envelope was on my kitchen table, thick with documents and DNA results and proof of every lie that had shaped our relationship. In less than 24 hours, I would stand up in front of everyone who mattered to them and reveal the truth. Marcus thought he knew me. He thought I was weak, desperate, easy to manipulate. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The hardest part wasn't discovering the lies. It was discovering how deep they went. After finding Robert's confession and the bank statements, I couldn't stop digging. Maybe it was the investigator in me, the part that needed to understand every detail of how thoroughly I'd been deceived. Or maybe I just needed to know exactly how many people had been laughing at the stupid woman who worked double shifts to support someone else's child. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Linda who specialized in family cases. I told her I needed to know everything about Sarah Hendricks and her relationship with Robert. Within 2 weeks, she'd uncovered a web of deception that went back to before Marcus was even born. Sarah hadn't been just Robert's secretary. She'd been his girlfriend for 3 years before I ever met him. When Robert started courting me, he never broke up with Sarah. Instead, he kept both relationships going simultaneously. Sarah knew about me, but I never knew about her. Your husband was running a long con, Linda told me during our meeting at her office. Sarah was from a wealthy family, old money. She was set to inherit a significant trust fund when she turned 30. Robert was positioning himself to benefit from that inheritance. She showed me photographs she'd obtained from Sarah's family. Pictures of Robert and Sarah at parties, on vacations, at family gatherings. Pictures that were taken during the same time period when he was promising me we'd get married as soon as he got his finances straightened out. When Sarah got pregnant, Robert panicked, Linda continued. If her family found out she was having a baby out of wedlock, especially with a married man, they might have cut her off completely. So he convinced her to keep the pregnancy secret and give the baby to him and his wife to raise. But I wasn't his wife yet, I pointed out. No, but you were desperate to marry him, and you'd already told him you couldn't have children. He saw an opportunity to solve multiple problems at once. He could give Sarah's baby a home, secure Sarah's trust fund by keeping her secret, and give you the child you wanted. Everyone would win. Except everyone didn't win. Sarah died at 26 from complications related to diabetes, a condition that could have been managed better if she hadn't been living in secret, stressed about hiding her son from her family. Her trust fund went to Robert as the father of her child, money that he used to set up the monthly payments to Marcus while keeping me in the dark about everything. There's more, Linda said, pulling out another folder. Sarah had 2 sisters who are still alive. They never knew she had a son. When she died, they were told she died childless, and her portion of the family estate was distributed among her cousins. But legally, Marcus would have been entitled to that inheritance. How much are we talking about? I asked. According to the family attorney I spoke with, Sarah's share would be worth approximately $2.7 million today. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Marcus had inherited millions of dollars from his real mother, but he'd continued to bleed me dry, letting me believe I was his only source of support. Did Marcus know about the inheritance? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Linda nodded grimly. The payments stopped going to Robert's account when he died and started going directly to Marcus. But the larger inheritance has been sitting unclaimed because Sarah's sisters don't know Marcus exists. I suspect Marcus has been working with a lawyer to figure out how to claim it without revealing the truth about his parentage. That's when I understood the real reason for the wedding. Marcus wasn't marrying Zoe because he loved her. He was marrying her because he needed a wife to help him navigate the complex legal process of claiming his inheritance from Sarah's family. Zoe's father was a lawyer who specialized in estate planning. This whole wedding was a business transaction. There's something else you need to know, Linda said. I spoke with some of Robert's former co-workers. According to them, Robert used to brag about having the perfect setup. He had a wife who worked herself to death to support his son, and he had a son who was set to inherit millions but didn't know it yet. He called it his retirement plan. My hands were shaking as I absorbed this information. Robert hadn't just lied to me about Marcus's parentage. He'd planned to use me as free childcare and financial support until Marcus came of age and claimed his real inheritance. Then presumably, Robert would have revealed the truth and Marcus would have shared his wealth with his real father. But Robert died before that could happen, leaving Marcus to figure out the inheritance on his own, and leaving me to continue supporting him financially while he worked with lawyers to claim millions of dollars that legally belonged to him. The wedding is in 3 days, Linda said. What do you want to do with this information? I looked at the thick file of documents, photographs, and legal papers that proved every aspect of the deception that had controlled my life for nearly 30 years. I want copies of everything, I said. And I want you to contact Sarah's sisters. They have a right to know they have a nephew. Are you sure? Once I contact them, there's no going back. Marcus's inheritance claim will become a legal battle. I'm sure. That night, I sat in my kitchen with all of Linda's findings spread across my table. Birth certificates, DNA tests, bank statements, photographs, legal documents, and a detailed timeline of every lie that Robert and Marcus had told me. I thought about the young woman I'd been at 25, desperate to get married and have a family. Robert had seemed like an answer to prayer. A handsome man with a good job who promised me the life I'd always wanted. When he told me about the baby who needed parents, I'd been overjoyed. Finally, I would be a mother. I thought about all the nights I'd worked double shifts to pay for Marcus's expenses. All the vacations I'd never taken because I was saving money for his college fund. All the times I'd worn secondhand clothes and eaten cheap meals so I could afford to give him the things he needed. And I thought about Marcus at 18 reading letters from his real mother and learning the truth about his parentage, then making the conscious decision to continue deceiving me. Not just to continue taking my money, but to actively manipulate me into giving him more. The worst part was how good he'd gotten at it. The way he'd learned to look at me with those sad eyes when he needed something. The way he'd perfected the role of the grateful son, who would do anything for his devoted mother. The way he'd made me feel like I was the most important person in his world, right up until the moment I stopped being useful. I gathered all the documents and put them in a large manila envelope. On the outside, I wrote the truth about Marcus Mitchell, in my clearest handwriting. Tomorrow, I would sit in that folding chair near the coat room and watch my son marry a woman who called me trash. I would smile and pretend everything was normal, while they celebrated a wedding I'd paid for with money I'd earned working jobs I hated. And then when the pastor asked if anyone had any reason why these two should not be married, I would stand up and tell the truth. Not because I wanted revenge, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of it. But because Sarah's sisters deserved to know about their nephew. Because the people at that wedding deserved to know what kind of man Marcus really was. And because after 30 years of being lied to, manipulated, and taken for granted, I deserved to finally tell the truth. Marcus thought he knew me. He thought I was weak, that I'd never fight back, that I'd continue to be his personal ATM until the day I died. He was about to discover that the woman who'd raised him, loved him, and sacrificed everything for him had more strength than he'd ever imagined. The ceremony was beautiful, I had to admit. Every detail was perfect, from the white roses I'd paid for to the string quartet I'd hired. Marcus looked handsome in his tuxedo as he waited at the altar, and Zoe was radiant as she walked down the aisle in her designer gown. If you didn't know the truth behind it all, you might have thought you were witnessing a fairy tale romance. I sat in my assigned seat near the back, the manila envelope heavy in my lap, and watched the performance unfold. Marcus's face lit up when he saw his bride approaching, but I noticed how his eyes briefly scanned the congregation, probably calculating which guests might be useful to him in the future. Zoe beamed at everyone as she passed, but when her gaze fell on me, her smile turned cold and satisfied. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd successfully put me in my place, relegated me to the role of silent benefactor who would continue funding their lifestyle while being treated like hired help. They had no idea what was coming. Pastor Williams, a kind elderly man who'd known Marcus since he was a child, began the ceremony with a warm smile. He spoke about love, commitment, and the sacred bond of marriage. He talked about how blessed Marcus and Zoe were to have found each other, and how their families had come together to celebrate this joyous occasion. Family, he said, gesturing toward the congregation, is the foundation upon which a marriage is built. The love and support of those who have shaped us into who we are today. I almost laughed at the irony. If only he knew what kind of foundation this marriage was actually built on. The vows were traditional and predictable. Marcus promised to love, honor, and cherish Zoe for the rest of his life. Zoe promised to stand by Marcus through good times and bad, in sickness and in health. They exchanged rings with trembling hands, and for a moment, I wondered if either of them actually meant a word they were saying. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. If there is anyone here, Pastor Williams announced in his ceremonial voice, who knows of any lawful reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The church fell silent. This was usually just a formality, a traditional part of the ceremony that no one ever actually interrupted. The guests sat quietly, probably thinking about the reception to come. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor echoed through the silent church. Every head turned toward me, and I heard a collective intake of breath from the congregation. Marcus's face went pale, and Zoe's bouquet trembled in her hands. I object, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the church. Pastor Williams looked confused and slightly alarmed. Mrs. Mitchell, This is highly irregular. Perhaps we could discuss this after the ceremony. No, I said firmly, stepping into the aisle with my envelope. This needs to be said now, in front of everyone. Marcus found his voice first. Mom, what are you doing? Sit down. Don't call me Mom, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The words hit him like a physical blow, and I saw him actually take a step backward. I walked down the aisle slowly, deliberately, my eyes fixed on the altar where my son and his bride stood frozen in shock. The congregation murmured behind me, but I didn't care. This moment was 30 years in the making. When I reached the front of the church, I turned to face the guests. I recognized most of them. Zoe's wealthy parents and their country club friends. Marcus's college buddies who'd always treated me like I was invisible. Distant relatives who only showed up for weddings and funerals. All of them staring at me with curiosity, embarrassment, and growing alarm. My name is Joyce Mitchell. I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Most of you know me as Marcus's mother. The woman who raised him, sacrificed for him, and paid for this beautiful wedding you're all enjoying today. Joyce, please, Zoe's mother called out from the front row. This isn't appropriate. You're right, I agreed. Nothing about this situation is appropriate. But it's time for the truth. I opened my envelope and pulled out the DNA test results. 3 months ago, I discovered that Marcus is not my biological son. He was never adopted through an agency, as I was led to believe for 27 years. He is the illegitimate child of my late ex-husband and his secretary Sarah Hendricks. The church erupted. People gasped, whispered frantically to each other, and turned to stare at Marcus, who stood at the altar looking like he might faint. That's impossible, he said weakly. Mom, you're confused. You're having some kind of breakdown. Am I? I held up the DNA results. These are official laboratory results. 0 probability that Marcus Mitchell is my biological child. But that's not even the worst part. I pulled out copies of Marcus's letters, the ones I'd found hidden in his apartment. Marcus has known the truth since he was 18 years old. His real mother, Sarah, told him everything before she died. He's known for 9 years that I'm not his real mother, and he's been deliberately exploiting my love and generosity while laughing about it behind my back. The silence in the church was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat as I continued. Marcus calls me the ATM in his text messages. He and Zoe joke about how easy it is to manipulate poor old Joyce. They've been planning to convince me to sell my house so they can have access to that money too. Zoe's father, the lawyer, stood up abruptly. This is slander. We'll sue you for every penny you have. I smiled at him. With what evidence? Everything I'm saying is documented. DNA tests, bank records, letters written in your daughter's precious husband's own handwriting. Sue me all you want. The truth is the truth. I turned back to Marcus, who was now visibly shaking. But here's the part you're really not going to like, son. I hired a private investigator. Sarah Hendricks came from a wealthy family. She had a trust fund and inheritance that legally belongs to you. $2.7 million to be exact. Marcus's eyes widened, and I knew I'd hit my target. The problem is, Sarah's family doesn't know you exist. They think she died childless. So you've been working with lawyers, trying to figure out how to claim your inheritance without revealing the truth about your parentage. That's why you're really marrying Zoe, isn't it? Because her father specializes in estate law, and you need help navigating the legal complexities of claiming money from a family that doesn't know you exist. Zoe dropped her bouquet. The flowers scattered across the altar steps as she stared at Marcus with dawning horror. Is that true? Is that why you proposed to me? Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. His guilty silence was answer enough. I've already contacted Sarah's sisters, I continued. They're flying in from Boston tomorrow to meet their nephew and contest his inheritance claim. You see, Marcus, when you inherit money through deception, it tends to complicate things legally. Pastor Williams, who had been standing in shocked silence throughout my revelation, finally found his voice. I think perhaps we should postpone this ceremony. No need, I said, tucking my documents back into the envelope. I've said what I came to say. I looked at Marcus one last time, this young man I'd loved and raised and sacrificed for, who had repaid my devotion with lies and manipulation. You're not my son, I said quietly. You never were. And after today you never will be. I turned and walked back down the aisle, past the shocked faces and whispered conversations. Behind me I could hear Zoe screaming at Marcus, demanding answers. I could hear guests talking over each other, trying to process what they just witnessed. I could hear Pastor Williams attempting to restore order to his sanctuary. But I didn't look back. I walked out of that church with my head held high, leaving behind 30 years of lies, manipulation, and one-sided love. The boy I'd raised was about to face the consequences of his choices. And for the first time in decades, those consequences had nothing to do with me. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. For 30 years my phone had been ringing constantly. Marcus needing money for rent, for car repairs, for medical bills, for vacations, for engagement rings, for wedding expenses. Zoe calling with demands disguised as requests, always sweetening her voice when she wanted something. Extended family members asking me to contribute to various causes because Marcus is doing so well, and you must be so proud. Now nothing. I spent the first week after the wedding in my quiet house, actually relaxing for the first time in decades. I read books I'd been meaning to get to for years. I watched movies without worrying about my phone ringing. I cooked meals for one person and ate them slowly, without rushing off to work an extra shift to pay someone else's bills. On the 8th day, Marcus showed up at my door. He looked terrible. His hair was unwashed, his clothes wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. When I opened the door, he immediately started talking. Mom, please, we need to talk. This has all gotten out of hand. Zoe left me. She took the ring, she canceled the honeymoon. She's telling everyone that I used her. Her father is threatening to sue me for fraud. Sarah's sisters have frozen my trust fund payments while they investigate. I've got lawyers calling me constantly, and I don't know what to do. I stood in my doorway looking at this young man who had shaped my entire adult life, and I felt nothing but exhaustion. What do you want from me, Marcus? I want my mom back, he said, and his voice cracked like he was 12 years old again. I know I made mistakes. I know I should have told you the truth, but you're still my mom. You're the only mom I've ever known. That has to count for something. For a moment, just a moment, my heart softened. This was the boy I'd rocked to sleep when he had nightmares. The child I'd cheered for at Little League games. The teenager I'd stayed up with when he was sick with the flu. Then I remembered the letters. The text messages. The years of calculated manipulation. No, I said simply. What? No, Marcus. I'm not your mom anymore. I'm not your ATM anymore. I'm not your safety net or your backup plan or your emergency contact. I'm done. His face crumpled. You don't mean that. You love me. You've always loved me. I loved the child I thought you were, I said. I loved the son I believed I was raising. But that person never existed, did he? That was just a role you played when you needed something from me. That's not true. I do love you. You're the most important person in my life. I almost laughed. Marcus, you called me the ATM in text messages to your fiancé. You joked about how easy it was to manipulate me. You planned to trick me into selling my house. That's not love. That's exploitation. I was young and stupid. People say things they don't mean when they're with their friends. For 9 years? You've been lying to me for 9 years, Marcus. Every hug, every I love you, Mom. Every time you made me feel special and needed, it was all fake. He stepped closer, and I saw desperation in his eyes. It wasn't all fake. Maybe some of it was, but not all of it. You did raise me. You did sacrifice for me. That means something. It means I was a fool, I said. It means I let myself be used by someone who learned how to manipulate people from his biological father, a man who was apparently just as skilled at deception as you are. Don't compare me to him. I'm not Robert. Aren't you? You both lied to me for years. You both used me to support lifestyles you couldn't afford. You both made me feel like I was special while treating me like I was disposable. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Harder. Fine. You want to play it this way? You want to destroy my life over some old resentment? Just remember that you chose to raise me. You chose to spend your money on me. Nobody forced you to do any of that. And there it was. The mask finally slipping completely away. This was who Marcus really was underneath all the fake affection and manufactured gratitude. You're right, I said calmly. I did choose all of that. Because I thought I was being a good mother to my son. But you weren't my son, and you knew it. You made the choice to deceive me. You made the choice to exploit me. And now you're making the choice to blame me for the consequences of your actions. So that's it? After 27 years, you're just going to throw me away. Marcus, you threw me away the day you decided I was nothing more than a source of money. The day you started calling me the ATM. The day you planned to manipulate me into giving you my house. I'm not throwing you away. I'm just finally seeing you clearly. He stood there for another moment, and I could see him trying to decide whether to keep pleading or to get angry. He chose anger. You're going to regret this, he said. When you're old and alone and have nobody, you're going to remember that you had a son who loved you, and you threw it all away out of spite. Goodbye, Marcus, I said and closed the door. I watched from my window as he stood on my porch for several minutes, probably hoping I'd change my mind and come back out. When he finally left, I knew it would be the last time I'd see him. 3 months later, I got a call from Linda, my private investigator. Thought you'd want to know how things turned out, she said. Sarah's sisters won their legal battle. Marcus's claim to the inheritance was denied because it was based on fraudulent documents. The monthly payments he'd been receiving were also ruled fraudulent, and he's been ordered to repay them. About $140,000. What about Zoe? Married her personal trainer 2 weeks ago. Small ceremony in Vegas. Her father disowned her apparently. Said he couldn't have a daughter who showed such poor judgment in men. I found myself smiling. And Marcus? Living in a studio apartment, working at a call center. Sarah's sisters offered to help him financially if he agreed to undergo therapy and make a genuine effort to change his behavior. He declined. Said he didn't need help from judgmental old women who didn't understand his situation. After I hung up, I realized I felt no satisfaction from Marcus's downfall, no vindictive joy at his struggles. I just felt free. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in 30 years. I bought myself something expensive just because I wanted it. A beautiful necklace I've been admiring in a jewelry store window for months. The kind of purchase I never would have made when I was supporting Marcus, because that money would have been needed for his rent or his car payment or his latest financial emergency. I wore it to church on Sunday, and 3 different people complimented me on it. When they asked where I got it, I told them I bought it for myself. One woman, Helen, who was about my age, smiled and said, "Good for you. It's never too late to start putting yourself first." She was right. At 65, I was finally learning to put myself first. I started taking a pottery class at the community center. I joined a book club. I volunteered at the animal shelter, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when I was working extra shifts to support Marcus. My life became smaller in some ways but richer in others. Instead of phone calls asking for money, I got calls from new friends asking if I wanted to go to movies or try new restaurants. Instead of dreading my mailbox because it might contain bills from Marcus's latest crisis, I looked forward to letters from my pottery teacher about upcoming classes. 6 months after the wedding, I ran into Marcus's former college roommate at the grocery store. He recognized me and came over to talk. "Mrs. Mitchell, I heard about what happened at Marcus's wedding. I just wanted you to know a lot of us always thought he was taking advantage of you. We never said anything because it wasn't our business, but we always respected how hard you worked for him." "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." "For what it's worth," he added, "I think you did the right thing." Marcus needed to learn that actions have consequences. A year later, I sold my house. Not because Marcus had manipulated me into it, but because I wanted to. I bought a smaller place closer to town, with a garden where I could grow vegetables and flowers. The money left over from the sale went into my retirement account, where it would benefit me instead of funding someone else's lifestyle. I never heard from Marcus again. Sometimes I wondered if he ever really understood what he'd lost. Not just my financial support, but the love of someone who had genuinely cared about him. Someone who would have done anything for him if he'd just been honest with me. But those moments of wondering became fewer and fewer. I had built a new life, a real life, based on genuine relationships and honest affection. I had friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. On quiet evenings in my new home, sitting in my garden with a cup of tea, I sometimes thought about the woman I used to be. The woman who worked herself to exhaustion trying to earn love from people who were only pretending to care about her. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and finally at peace. I had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to stop being someone else's source of unconditional support and start being your own source of unconditional worth. At 65, I had finally learned to love myself as much as I had once loved a son who never truly existed.